Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to be talking about Zweihander RPG, grim and perilous role-playing game, and specifically we're going to talk about ancestries, attributes, and archetypes within this game. Daniel D. Fox, the designer, made some very specific choices. Zweihander RPG is a 669-page fantasy tabletop role-playing game that you could buy for $65. It was built on $60,000 of Kickstarter money, and it's a game I love to hate. I really dislike this game, but I'm absolutely fascinated by it. I really think it should be studied by every game designer because it's really I think it's a not good game, extremely well executed by someone who cared very deeply about it. All right, so let's talk about some of the choices in here. First of all, ancestries, right? Here we see Daniel D. Fox. One of the things I love about Daniel D. Fox is it's clear he's paying attention to the industry, right? So one of the things is this is going to be a test going forward. Everybody who's paying attention to the industry, the word race will never be used again in a new tabletop role-playing game. Everybody who's paying attention to the conversations that are going on in the TTRPG industry is using a different term. The new terms are heritage, ancestry, lineage. These are all acceptable terms. Race is definitely being gotten rid of, and if you see race in a new tabletop role-playing game, you can tell that person is really not. They're focused on their own thing, and they're not really looking sideways. They're not looking to other great creators. That's usually a bad sign, right? Really, that choice, to me, going forward, it doesn't even have to do with politics. It has to do with whether you're actually paying attention to the conversation that is happening around tabletop role-playing game design, right? So Daniel D. Fox gets rid of it. He uses the term ancestries, which I totally agree with this. I think we should get rid of that word. This is a better word. It's cool to get rid of that old word, right? And I find it amusing to just see whatever the designers replace it with. It's interesting. It's interesting to me. Okay. All right. So let's talk about what. So it's a very short list. It's only six ancestries are in this game. It is specifically, here's a big one, human, elf, dwarf, right? Now, human, elf, dwarf is really interesting because, again, when you come to design a fantasy tabletop role-playing game, your first decision is human, elf, dwarf. Do you have human, elf, dwarf in there? And if human, elf, dwarf are in there, what you're doing is you're setting yourself into orbit around Tolkien. A lot of people don't like that. They're like, oh, my stuff's independent, man. It ain't. It is incredibly hard to escape the orbit of Tolkien, right? And whether you're doing it consciously or unconsciously, the moment you choose human, elf, dwarf, you really set yourself very specifically within the space of orbiting Tolkien, right? And if you decide not to go down that road, and you're like, no, I'm not going to do that, human, elf, dwarf are not going to be in there. I'm going to have my own ancestries, my own lineages, my own heritages, right? And then you set up your own, what people used to call races. That really will change your entire world. But if you keep human, elf, dwarf, you remain within the orbit of Tolkien. And Zweihander is well within the orbit of Tolkien, right? It definitely pays homage to Tolkien, right? And I just find it fascinating. I think Tolkien is now a wall you push off against, or you pay homage to him. It's one or the other, right? It's incredible how strong his work is and how it still impacts game design even to this day, right? The other three ancestries are just a complete waste of space, right? So you got halfling. I don't like halflings. They're always used the same way. You got somebody who's like, I'm gonna, pickpocket everybody. Like, halfling is always the same nonsense. It's just somebody in your group who wants to pickpocket the other PCs. It drives me nuts. It's a cliche, and I just don't see the point of having halflings anymore. Not only does this game have halflings, but it also has gnomes. And I'm like, really? What is the point? Why are those ancestries so distinct that you need both of these? Seems crazy to me, right? But they're both here. Halfling and gnome. Very poor choices, in my opinion. You know, one of the things I really like recently is Tiny D6 games. They have these like half animal races, like so they have like a half turtle, and they have like a half salamander and a half bear. You know, like, I think it's called like an ursine or something. Those are great. I love those. You know, but like just throwing in the halfling and gnome, just complete waste of space. I really didn't like those choices. And the last one is very, very strange too. Ogre, right? Like ogre, like. If you're not going to have a half-orc, why on earth are you going to have an ogre? And by the way, this game just really doesn't... it doesn't list as a base race. It does not list as a base race half-elves or any of those. It does go into demi-humans, though. And I thought it was very interesting. What this game did is... basically, here's the other thing is... dwarf, elf, halfling, gnome, all these things, right? Like, essentially, when you go into demi-human, if you are half of anything and then human as well, this game, like, really wipes the board and is just like, all that's flavor. Whatever your ancestry is, it's really flavor, and it does a lot to just smooth everything out and really not give distinctions between the ancestries. I don't think this is a great idea. It definitely was not one of my favorite things within the game, and it was just odd. Like, to me, like if you're gonna have these distinct ancestries, right? It seems odd to just have it for flavor. It should have with Dungeons and Dragons. It has really distinct impact, right? Whereas in this game, they really don't use distinct impact for demi-humans the way I think. You know, it seems like it. I definitely understand smoothing out the differences for gender, but you know, smoothing out the differences for ancestry, it does, in my opinion, it seems to take away a significant flavor. And the biggest reason why is specifically Tolkien. Within Tolkien, these different ancestries really had very distinct, different things that they were good at and things that they were bad at. And this game, it seemed really uneven as far as it's saying, well, we want to acknowledge ancestries, but then we don't want to make them mechanically significant, which is really kind of odd. And then the other thing is, like I said, like to have ogre in the game but not have a half-orc, that just seems like crazy. So the ancestries in Zweihander, I just thought were really, really odd. The game has you go from ancestries right over to attributes. Attributes in Zweihander are some of the worst choices I have ever seen in a tabletop role-playing game. So bad. So one of the attributes, I'm not kidding, this is an attribute, is combat. Like, what? Like, this is just a terrible, terrible choice, right? So one, when you make combat an attribute, you are pinning your game. Like, so one of the things, so I just don't, and the thing that fascinates me about this is I know Daniel D. Fox has read 5e, right? So, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is like, okay, listen, I know you've been doing your hack and slash games forever, but the game is three things now. It's exploration, it's combat, and it's interaction, right? We want your player character to talk to, we want your player character to talk to non-player characters, to talk to player characters. We want interaction. We want social interaction as a huge, important aspect of the game. We want exploration, right? We want you to discover new parts of this world, new realms, go through portals, like do exciting, fun things that create a character out of the environment. This is brilliant, and it's obvious. And then it's saying last is combat. It's a third of the game, right? Zweihander Grim and Perilous RPG says that its game stands on three pillars: brutal violence, political intrigue, right, and profane sorcery, right? Now, if you want there to be political intrigue, you should not make one entire attribute combat. It's crazy, right? It's just so poorly chosen, right? It's just really, really a bad idea, and it really declares that your game is going to be hack and slash, which seems an incredibly odd choice when you're saying that a third of your game should be political intrigue. It's just really, really strange choice, right? Next is brawn, which is just a name for strength, which, again, if you literally have combat as an attribute, what's the point of then listing brawn and agility which are the next attributes in the game. I'm like, what's the point of that, right? If you have high brawn and high agility, you're going to be good at combat. It made no sense. Just really, really strange. There's such strange design choices within this game. Then, literally as an attribute is perception, right? Now, this is a skill. It doesn't, like, it's such a hot mess. This attribute list is such a hot mess. Perception actually lives right in the attribute list. So you have a skill dropped into the attribute list, right? It's really strange to me when you look at Zweihander. It took so much intelligence and persistence to complete this, but some of the choices just look like they were made by a middle schooler. It's really, really strange. Very strange. Then you have perception, and right after that you have int and will, right? You have intelligence and willpower. Again, like these are subsets within perception. It's a mess. The attribute list in this game is an absolute mess. There's one good thing on the entire attribute list, which is fellowship. Great idea. I love it. I really think that I love the idea of this being an attribute. But it does bring up, but if you're going to use fellowship, actually a great point is they could have just made combat, perception, and intelligence the 3 attributes. That would have made some sense, right? But if you're going to leave charisma off, but then you have fellowship, it's just super strange and odd. The choices in this game were very, very odd, right? And the only other thing is, the only reason why I'm taking the time to talk about this is the designer knew better. That's so clear. This isn't somebody who was not good at the task. It's just somebody who made really odd choices for really, really weird reasons, right? Addition to that, so that's all the attributes. Very odd selections within the attribute list. Last is archetypes. The game has archetypes. Now, I actually love this aspect of the game. The archetypes within this game are groupings for the professions, okay? There are over 60 professions in Zweihander RPG, right? But that's very unwieldy, right? So one of the things that the game does is it groups these professions within archetypes. So the first archetype is academic. And an academic is exactly what it sounds like. It's somebody who's going to be getting their power from having read books. The next one was commoners. I thought this was an odd choice. This is a old. So commoner grouping is really interesting, and I seriously dislike all the professions connected to commoner because it's that old school 1E, 2E, grognard. You're a dirt farmer and you stink. You're a rat catcher. Dude, come on. Why would you make rat catcher an actual class? I know there are whole groups of people who are like, oh, that's the very best. I love. Actually, here's the thing. Players do not like being dirt farmers, right? They don't like super low-class, scrubby characters, right? But dungeon masters love to lord their power over it. And your character's going to be a rat catcher for 18 games before you actually get to do anything. And then when you actually own a +1 sword, you're going to be really happy about it. This game, oh my gosh, Zweihander drives me nuts. I think it really preserves some of the absolute worst things from old Dungeons & Dragons and from old TTRPGs. There's also knave. This would be your rogue and your thief and your shadow master, all those kind of, those ones specifically. There's also socialite. So this is the ones that would group up diplomats and merchants and people who really make their bones through charisma, and in this game fellowship, which is again a strange choice. And then finally there's 2 last archetypes, which were ranger and warrior, and I think that is interesting to have that in there to think about these 2 things being distinct, because rangers really are quite different. They are warriors whose skill set extends into these more outdoorsy skill sets that allow for survival and things like that, where warriors are incredibly focused on purely killing things. There's 2 last things I wanted to talk. There's one last thing I wanted to talk about in this game, and that is the concept of humanocentrism, right? Daniel D. Fox says specifically that this game is humanocentric, right? And that's a really fancy word to say. You ain't gonna get no Dragonborn up in here, right? You know, and it's the idea that humans are the center of the game. They're the core of the game. And there's some really interesting discussion of that in the game, talking about why the game is humanocentric and what that means for the game itself and how stories are told with the game, which I thought was interesting. Zweihander is truly an incredibly interesting game. I think there are just a ton. It's a massive collection of poor game design choices, but the game does absolutely fascinate me. It really, really is interesting. That is my presentation of specifically Ancestry, Attribute, and the archetypes within Zweihander, and my discussion of those aspects of the game. All of that is my opinion. I would love to hear your opinion below in the comments. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.